Artemis, one of the most powerful and revered deities in Greek mythology, has long captured the imagination of cultures across the world. Known as the goddess of the hunt, nature, and wild animals, her influence extended far beyond the borders of ancient Greece, reaching civilizations such as Rome and Egypt. But what if I told you that her presence might not be confined to the myths of the ancient world? Could there be a deeper connection between Artemis and the Bible, one that has been largely overlooked or misunderstood? Today, we're going to explore the truth about Artemis in the context of the Bible, unraveling her possible role and symbolism in the scriptures. At first glance, Artemis may seem like a figure from a distant past, a goddess worshipped in temples and associated with ancient rituals. But when we delve into the historical and spiritual context of the time, it becomes clear that the idea of deities like Artemis might have left an indelible mark on biblical history. While Artemis is never explicitly mentioned in the Bible, her worship was widespread in the Mediterranean world, and her followers were active in some of the regions where early Christian teachings were spreading. The question then arises, was there any connection between Artemis and the biblical texts? Were there ideas and practices associated with her worship that may have influenced the way early Christians understood spirituality? This video will take you on a journey through ancient history and biblical scriptures, shedding light on the possible intersections between Artemis and the Bible. We will explore how the early Christian church encountered and confronted the influence of Artemis, especially in cities like Ephesus, where her temple stood as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. We will examine how the Apostle Paul's letters and the actions of early Christians were shaped by the cultural and religious environment in which they lived, a world where the worship of Artemis and other pagan deities was still very much alive. As we go deeper into the subject, we'll also reflect on the symbolic significance of Artemis. From her role as a protector of women and children to her representation as a goddess of the natural world, Artemis embodies themes that are not entirely foreign to the Bible. By analyzing these themes, we'll see how her symbolism might resonate with key biblical concepts, such as purity, fertility, and divine protection. Could Artemis have represented something more than just a pagan idol? Could her image and attributes have held a deeper, more spiritual meaning that still speaks to us today? But this exploration doesn't end with the past. By the end of this video, we hope to offer new insights into how the legacy of Artemis has shaped not just ancient religious practices, but even modern spiritual thinking. As we uncover the truth about her role in history and her potential connections to the Bible, you may find that Artemis's story isn't as distant or irrelevant as it might seem. So stay with us as we uncover the hidden truths about Artemis, her place in the scriptures, and how her influence continues to echo through the corridors of time. If you've ever wondered about the forgotten figures of ancient mythology and their potential influence on biblical history, this video is for you. Don't miss out on this fascinating exploration. Keep watching until the end as we dive deeper into the mystery of Artemis and the truth that may have been hidden for centuries. Artemis, one of the most prominent figures in Greek mythology, has a history deeply rooted in the cultural and spiritual fabric of the ancient Mediterranean world. Known as the goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, and chastity, Artemis was a complex and multifaceted deity whose worship spanned centuries and regions. To fully understand her significance, it is essential to explore her origins, her roles in various cultures, and the profound impact her image and cult had on the societies that revered her. The origins of Artemis trace back to early Greek mythology, where she was said to be the daughter of Zeus, the king of the gods, and Leto, a Titaness. Twin sister to Apollo, the god of music, prophecy, and the sun, Artemis was often associated with the moon, in contrast to Apollo's solar symbolism. Her connection to nature and the wilderness was intrinsic to her identity, as she was believed to protect the forests, mountains, and all the creatures that inhabited them. This deep bond with the natural world made her a guardian of both animals and people, especially women and children. Worship of Artemis flourished across ancient Greece, with her most significant sanctuary located in Ephesus, a city on the western coast of what is now Turkey. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, also known as the Artemision, was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. This monumental structure, adorned with intricate sculptures and towering columns, was not only a testament to her cultural significance, but also a center for economic, political, and social activities. Pilgrims from across the Mediterranean journeyed to Ephesus to pay homage to Artemis, bringing offerings and seeking her favor. The wealth generated by the temple helped transform Ephesus into a thriving metropolis, showcasing the goddess's influence far beyond religious practices. Artemis's roles in Greek society were diverse and complex. As a virgin goddess, she symbolized independence and strength, often rejecting the traditional expectations placed on women in ancient cultures. This aspect of her identity made her particularly revered by women who sought her protection during childbirth and prayed to her for health and fertility. Artemis's duality as a protector of life and a huntress who could take it away reflected the natural world's balance, embodying both creation and destruction. This balance resonated deeply with the Greeks, who viewed her as a powerful yet nurturing force. The influence of Artemis extended beyond Greece into other ancient cultures, where she was often equated with similar deities. In Rome, she was identified with Diana, the goddess of the hunt and the moon. The Romans adopted many aspects of Artemis's worship, incorporating her attributes into their own religious practices. In Anatolia, she was associated with Cybele, a mother goddess revered for her connection to fertility and the earth. These syncretic interpretations highlight how the figure of Artemis transcended cultural boundaries, adapting to the beliefs and traditions of different societies. One of the unique aspects of Artemis's worship was the role of women in her cult. Unlike many other religious practices in the ancient world, where male priests dominated, Artemis's temples often featured priestesses and female devotees who played a central role in rituals and ceremonies. These rituals frequently emphasized themes of purity, transformation, and protection. Young girls participated in rites of passage under her guidance, symbolically transitioning from childhood to womanhood. These ceremonies not only reinforced social norms, but also offered a rare space for women to hold positions of spiritual authority. Artemis's connection to the natural world also had practical implications in the societies that worshipped her. As a deity of the hunt, she was invoked by hunters seeking success and safety during their expeditions. Offerings such as animal sacrifices and dedications of hunting equipment were made in her honor. Additionally, her association with the moon linked her to agricultural cycles, and farmers often sought her blessings for bountiful harvests. This integration of Artemis's worship into daily life underscored her importance as a goddess who bridged the spiritual and the practical. The symbolic representation of Artemis evolved over time, reflecting the changing cultural and artistic sensibilities of the ancient world. Early depictions of Artemis portrayed her as a young athletic woman, often holding a bow and accompanied by a deer or other woodland creatures. This imagery emphasized her role as a huntress and protector of the wilderness. In later periods, particularly during the Hellenistic era, her image became more elaborate, incorporating elements of luxury and grandeur that mirrored the artistic trends of the time. Statues of Artemis from this period, such as the famous Ephesian Artemis, featured her adorned with multiple breasts or egg-like shapes, symbolizing fertility and abundance. These artistic interpretations highlight how the goddess's image adapted to meet the spiritual and cultural needs of her worshippers. Artemis's influence also extended to literature and mythology, where she played pivotal roles in various tales. She was known for her fierce loyalty to her principles and her often unforgiving nature toward those who defied her. Stories of Artemis, punishing those who disrespected her, such as Actaeon, who saw her bathing and was transformed into a stag, illustrate her formidable power and the respect she commanded. These myths served as cautionary tales, reinforcing the values and norms associated with her worship. Despite her prominence, the worship of Artemis faced challenges as the ancient world evolved. The rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire marked a significant shift in religious practices, leading to the decline of traditional pagan cults. Temples dedicated to Artemis were repurposed or abandoned, and her image gradually faded from mainstream religious life. However, traces of her influence persisted, particularly in regions where her worship had been deeply entrenched. Elements of her mythology and symbolism were absorbed into Christian narratives, reflecting the enduring legacy of her cultural impact. Today, the legacy of Artemis continues to captivate scholars, artists, and spiritual seekers. Her dual nature as a fierce protector and a nurturing force resonates with modern audiences, who find inspiration in her independence and connection to the natural world. The ruins of the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, though largely destroyed, remain a testament to her enduring significance and the devotion she inspired. Through her myths, imagery, and historical presence, Artemis offers a glimpse into the values and beliefs of the ancient world, reminding us of the profound ways in which mythology and culture shape our understanding of the divine. Artemis was not merely a goddess confined to the pages of mythology. She was a living presence in the lives of the people who worshipped her. Her temples were not just places of worship, but centers of community and identity. Her stories were not just entertainment, but reflections of the values and challenges of her time. By exploring the historical and cultural context of Artemis, we gain a deeper understanding of the world that revered her and the legacy she left behind. A legacy that continues to inspire and intrigue to this day. The presence of Artemis in the context of the Bible is an intriguing subject, primarily because she is not explicitly mentioned in the scriptures. However, her influence was deeply embedded in the cultural and religious fabric of the ancient Mediterranean world, particularly in regions where early Christianity began to spread. Understanding her role in the Bible's broader historical and cultural context requires examining her significance in cities like Ephesus and her interactions with the growing Christian movement. While Artemis herself does not appear as a figure in the Bible, her prominence as a deity in the ancient world provides valuable insights into the challenges and conflicts faced by early Christians. Artemis was worshipped extensively in the Greco-Roman world, and her cult was especially strong in Ephesus, one of the key cities of the early Christian era. The Temple of Artemis, also known as the Artemision, was not only a religious center, but also an economic and cultural hub. As one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the temple drew pilgrims, merchants, and artisans from across the Mediterranean. This vast network of worshippers and the economic prosperity it brought to Ephesus made the cult of Artemis an integral part of the city's identity. Ephesus is prominently mentioned in the New Testament, particularly in the Acts of the Apostles and the letters of Paul. In Acts, the Apostle Paul visits Ephesus during his missionary journeys and encounters significant resistance from the local population due to his preaching. One of the most dramatic moments occurs in Acts chapter 19, where a silversmith named Demetrius, who made shrines of Artemis, stirs up a riot against Paul. Demetrius accuses Paul of persuading people to turn away from Artemis, endangering their trade and the reputation of the goddess herself. This incident highlights the centrality of Artemis to the Ephesian economy and the religious devotion she inspired among her followers. The riot in Ephesus reflects the broader tension between early Christianity and the pagan religions of the time. For centuries, deities like Artemis had been central to the spiritual and cultural lives of people in the Mediterranean. The arrival of Christianity, with its emphasis on monotheism and rejection of idols, posed a direct challenge to these long-established traditions. Paul's message that gods made with hands are not gods struck at the heart of the Ephesian identity, which was closely tied to the worship of Artemis and the economic activity generated by her temple. The conflict between the followers of Artemis and the early Christians underscores the cultural and spiritual upheaval occurring during this period of religious transformation. While Artemis is not named directly in the Bible, the context of her worship sheds light on several themes that resonate with biblical teachings. Artemis was a protector of women and children, often associated with fertility, purity, and the natural world. These themes are not entirely alien to the Bible, where similar ideas appear in various forms. For example, the Bible frequently portrays God as a protector and provider, particularly for the vulnerable and marginalized. The Psalms often describe God as a refuge for those in need, echoing the protective qualities attributed to Artemis. This overlap in symbolic roles offers an opportunity to explore how different spiritual traditions address universal human concerns. The association of Artemis with fertility and the natural world also invites comparisons with biblical narratives about creation and stewardship. Artemis was revered as a goddess who governed the cycles of life and death, embodying the balance of nature. In the Bible, the natural world is described as a reflection of God's glory, with humanity given the responsibility to care for and sustain it. While the Bible and the cult of Artemis diverge in their theological foundations, their shared reverence for the natural world underscores a common human desire to find meaning and connection in creation. The prominence of Artemis in Ephesus and her influence on its inhabitants provide a backdrop for understanding the challenges faced by early Christians in spreading their faith. Paul's letters to the Ephesians and Timothy, which are believed to have been written with Ephesus in mind, address issues of idolatry and spiritual maturity. For instance, Paul warns against being tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine and emphasizes the importance of spiritual growth and unity in Christ. These teachings may have been intended to strengthen the faith of Christians living in a city dominated by the worship of Artemis and other pagan practices. Another significant aspect of Artemis in the biblical context is her role as a symbol of idolatry, which is a recurring theme in the Scriptures. The Bible frequently condemns the worship of idols, portraying it as a rejection of the one true God. The story of the golden calf in Exodus and the repeated admonitions against idolatry in the prophetic books highlight the tension between monotheism and the polytheistic practices of surrounding cultures. In this sense, the worship of Artemis and the economic system built around her temple in Ephesus can be seen as a tangible example of the idolatry that the Bible seeks to challenge. The tension between the worship of Artemis and the Christian message also reveals the transformative power of the gospel. In Acts, we see how Paul's preaching led some Ephesians to renounce their magical practices and burn their books of sorcery. This dramatic act symbolizes the shift from reliance on pagan rituals to faith in Christ. The willingness of these individuals to abandon deeply ingrained cultural and religious practices demonstrates the profound impact of the Christian message and its ability to challenge established norms. Artemis's role as a protector of women provides an interesting contrast to the biblical portrayal of women's roles and their spiritual significance. In the cult of Artemis, women played active roles as priestesses and participants in rituals, often finding a sense of empowerment through their devotion. In the New Testament, women are also portrayed as key figures in the early church, such as Lydia, Priscilla, and Phoebe, who contributed to the growth and support of Christian communities. This parallel highlights how both traditions recognize the spiritual contributions of women, albeit in different ways. The transformation of Ephesus from a center of Artemis worship to a significant site of Christian history underscores the profound cultural and spiritual changes that occurred in the ancient world. The decline of the cult of Artemis and the rise of Christianity in Ephesus serve as a microcosm of the broader transition from polytheism to monotheism that reshaped the Mediterranean world. This shift was not merely a change in religious practices, but a redefinition of identity, values, and worldview. Although Artemis does not appear directly in the Bible, her presence looms large in the historical and cultural context of the Scriptures. Her worship exemplifies the religious landscape that early Christians navigated, highlighting the challenges and opportunities they faced in spreading their faith. The story of Artemis in the context of the Bible is ultimately a story of transformation, where ancient traditions gave way to new spiritual horizons. It is a reminder of how faith and culture interact, shaping the lives and beliefs of individuals and communities throughout history. The worship of Artemis in Ephesus was one of the most prominent and enduring religious practices of the ancient world. Ephesus, located in what is now modern-day Turkey, was home to the Grand Temple of Artemis, a structure so magnificent that it was regarded as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. This temple was not merely a place of worship, but a cultural, economic, and social hub that defined the identity of Ephesus and its people. However, as Christianity began to spread across the Roman Empire, Ephesus became a focal point for the growing tensions between paganism and the emerging Christian faith. The confrontation between the worship of Artemis and Christianity reflects the broader religious and cultural transformations of the first century. The Temple of Artemis, known as the Artemision, was a marvel of ancient architecture. It was an enormous structure adorned with intricate carvings and towering columns, a symbol of both religious devotion and civic pride. Pilgrims from across the Mediterranean traveled to Ephesus to pay homage to Artemis, offering sacrifices and bringing gifts to the temple. The goddess was revered not only for her role as a protector of women and children, but also as a symbol of fertility, nature, and life itself. Her influence extended far beyond religious practice, permeating the economic and political life of the city. Artisans, merchants, and temple workers depended on the thriving cult of Artemis for their livelihoods, as the temple attracted a constant influx of visitors and wealth. The significance of Artemis in Ephesus is highlighted in the New Testament, particularly in the book of Acts. During his missionary journeys, the Apostle Paul spent considerable time in Ephesus, preaching the gospel and establishing a Christian community. This brought him into direct conflict with the entrenched worship of Artemis. The most notable incident occurred in Acts chapter 19, where Paul's teachings about the one true God began to disrupt the economic and religious fabric of the city. Paul proclaimed that gods made by human hands are no gods at all, challenging the legitimacy of Artemis and her temple. This message resonated with many in Ephesus, leading some to abandon their pagan practices and turn to Christianity. However, Paul's preaching also provoked a strong backlash from those who had a vested interest in the worship of Artemis. Demetrius, a silversmith who crafted small shrines of the goddess, gathered other craftsmen to oppose Paul. He argued that Paul's teachings threatened not only their trade, but also the reputation of Artemis, whose worship was central to the identity of Ephesus. Demetrius's speech ignited a riot, with the crowd filling the theater of Ephesus and chanting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." This event underscores the deep-seated devotion to Artemis and the economic dependence of the city on her cult. The confrontation in Ephesus reveals the profound cultural and spiritual challenges faced by early Christians. For centuries, the worship of Artemis had been a cornerstone of Ephesian society. Her temple was more than a religious center. It was a symbol of unity and identity for the people. Rejecting Artemis was not just a spiritual decision. It was a rejection of the social and cultural norms that had defined the city for generations. This explains the intensity of the resistance to Paul's message and the hostility toward the growing Christian movement. The riot in Ephesus also highlights the economic implications of religious change. The cult of Artemis was a major source of income for artisans, merchants, and the city as a whole. The production and sale of statues, amulets, and other religious artifacts were integral to the local economy. Paul's success in converting people to Christianity threatened this economic system, as new converts no longer purchased items associated with the worship of Artemis. This economic disruption fueled resentment and resistance among those whose livelihoods depended on the temple and its rituals. Despite the opposition, Christianity continued to grow in Ephesus. Paul's letters to the Ephesians and Timothy reflect the ongoing struggle between the Christian faith and the surrounding pagan culture. In these letters, Paul emphasizes the importance of unity, spiritual maturity, and standing firm in the faith. He warns against the influence of false doctrines and urges believers to live as a testimony to God's truth. These messages were particularly relevant in Ephesus, where the allure of Artemis and the pressures of conformity to the prevailing culture were constant challenges for the Christian community. One of the key aspects of the conflict between the worship of Artemis and Christianity was the contrast between their theological foundations. Artemis was a goddess deeply connected to the natural world, fertility, and the cycles of life and death. Her worship often involved elaborate rituals, processions, and sacrifices. In contrast, Christianity emphasized a personal relationship with one God, salvation through faith in Jesus Christ, and the rejection of idols. This theological divergence created a stark divide between the two belief systems, making coexistence difficult. The role of women in the worship of Artemis and in the Christian church adds another layer of complexity to this confrontation. Artemis was a protector of women, particularly in childbirth, and her temple served as a place where women could seek guidance and protection. Priestesses played a prominent role in her cult, conducting rituals and serving as intermediaries between the goddess and her followers. In the Christian church, women also played significant roles, as evidenced by figures like Priscilla and Lydia. However, Christianity introduced a different vision of womanhood, one rooted in the teachings of Christ and the apostles. This shift challenged traditional notions of femininity and power associated with the worship of Artemis. The decline of the worship of Artemis in Ephesus and the rise of Christianity represent a microcosm of the broader transition from polytheism to monotheism in the ancient world. Over time, as the Christian faith gained prominence and the Roman Empire officially adopted Christianity, pagan temples were abandoned or repurposed. The Temple of Artemis, once a symbol of Ephesian pride and religious devotion, fell into disuse and was eventually destroyed. This transformation marked the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new spiritual and cultural landscape. The legacy of the confrontation between the worship of Artemis and Christianity in Ephesus continues to resonate. It highlights the challenges of religious change, the interplay between faith and culture, and the power of belief to reshape societies. The story of Ephesus serves as a reminder of the complexities of spiritual transformation and the enduring impact of faith on history. In the end, the conflict between the cult of Artemis and the Christian message in Ephesus was not just a clash of religions, it was a confrontation between two visions of the world. The worship of Artemis represented a connection to the natural world, tradition, and community identity, while Christianity offered a new way of understanding life, salvation, and spiritual truth. This struggle between old and new, between the familiar and the transformative, is a timeless story that continues to inspire reflection on the nature of faith and its role in shaping human history. Artemis, a figure of great prominence in ancient Greek and Roman religion, is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible. However, her symbolic significance and cultural presence provide a fascinating lens through which to understand certain themes, narratives, and challenges faced by early Christians in the biblical world. The symbolic and representational elements associated with Artemis, particularly as they were manifest in Ephesus, shed light on the broader cultural and theological conflicts between paganism and Christianity. By examining the attributes and imagery of Artemis, parallels can be drawn that illuminate key biblical themes such as idolatry, purity, protection, and the interplay between the natural and the divine. The symbolism of Artemis begins with her dual role as a protector and a huntress. She was often depicted as a young, athletic woman carrying a bow and accompanied by a deer or other woodland animals, emphasizing her connection to nature and her dominion over the wilderness. This imagery reflects her association with life and fertility, as well as her authority over the cycles of life and death. In the biblical context, while Artemis herself does not appear, her role as a guardian and life-giver can be seen as a thematic parallel to God's providential care. The Psalms, for instance, frequently describe God as a protector and sustainer, watching over the vulnerable and guiding the faithful. Although the source of this protection is vastly different, Artemis as a pagan deity and God as the one true creator, the shared symbolism of care and guardianship underscores a universal human desire for divine protection. The Ephesian Artemis, in particular, carried rich layers of symbolic meaning that distinguished her from other regional representations of the goddess. Statues of Artemis in Ephesus often portrayed her with numerous breasts or egg-like forms adorning her chest, signifying fertility and abundance. These features symbolized her role as a nurturer and provider, ensuring the prosperity and well-being of her followers. In the Bible, themes of fertility and abundance are also central, particularly in the Old Testament, where God's blessings are frequently described in terms of fruitful harvests, thriving families, and the land flowing with milk and honey. This parallel highlights how cultures across time and place have sought divine assurance for survival and growth, though the sources and interpretations of these blessings differ profoundly. Artemis's role as a symbol of purity and chastity also invites comparison with biblical teachings. As a virgin goddess, she represented independence, self-control, and freedom from the constraints of societal expectations, particularly for women. In this sense, Artemis stood as a counterpoint to the more traditional roles often assigned to women in ancient cultures. Similarly, the Bible holds up purity as a spiritual ideal, though its expression often takes a different form. For example, the New Testament emphasizes purity of heart and spirit, urging believers to live lives free from sin and fully devoted to God. The virginity of Artemis symbolized autonomy and strength, while biblical purity signifies sanctification and a relationship with the divine. While the underlying meanings differ, both traditions reflect the importance of moral and spiritual integrity. The prominence of Artemis in Ephesus, as recorded in Acts chapter 19, provides further insight into her symbolic resonance within the biblical narrative. The riot incited by the silversmith Demetrius highlights the central role of Artemis in the city's economic and religious life. Artemis was not merely a goddess to the Ephesians. She was a symbol of their identity and pride. This deep cultural attachment to a deity underscores the biblical condemnation of idolatry. Throughout the Bible, idolatry is portrayed as a rejection of God's sovereignty and a turning away from the true source of life and worship. The worship of Artemis, with its elaborate rituals and devotion to her image, serves as a tangible example of the kind of idolatry that biblical authors sought to challenge. Another layer of symbolism associated with Artemis is her connection to the moon, which represented cycles, renewal, and the passage of time. Artemis, as a lunar deity, was linked to the rhythms of nature and the continuity of life. In biblical thought, the moon also holds symbolic significance, often representing stability and the constancy of God's promises. For instance, Psalm 89 compares God's covenant to the enduring presence of the moon, emphasizing the reliability of divine faithfulness. While Artemis's association with the moon is rooted in pagan cosmology, the shared use of celestial imagery to convey divine permanence reveals an overlap in symbolic language, even as the theological foundations diverge. The interplay between Artemis's representation as a protector of women and the biblical portrayal of God's care for the marginalized adds further depth to her symbolic exploration. Artemis was revered as a goddess who safeguarded women, particularly during childbirth. Her temple in Ephesus was a sanctuary where women could seek blessings, healing, and guidance. Similarly, the Bible often portrays God as a refuge for those in need, including women. The stories of figures like Hagar, Ruth, and Mary reflect God's provision and protection in moments of vulnerability. While the mechanisms of divine care differ, Artemis through her perceived divine presence and God through covenantal faithfulness, the thematic parallels reveal how spiritual traditions address universal human concerns. The figure of Artemis also serves as a lens for understanding the tension between the spiritual and material realms in the Bible. Her worship was deeply tied to physical representations, such as statues, amulets, and the Grand Temple in Ephesus. This emphasis on tangible symbols contrasts sharply with the biblical critique of material idolatry. The Bible consistently warns against relying on physical objects or images to represent the divine, emphasizing instead the spiritual nature of true worship. For instance, the second commandment explicitly forbids the making of graven images, reflecting a fundamental theological divide between monotheistic and polytheistic worldviews. The tension between Artemis's material symbols and the Bible's call for spiritual worship underscores the transformative message of Christianity in a world dominated by visible deities and rituals. The legacy of Artemis as a symbol of nature and wilderness also provides an intriguing point of comparison with biblical narratives. Artemis was the goddess of the wild, embodying the untamed beauty and power of the natural world. Her domain included forests, mountains, and animals, reflecting a reverence for creation. In the Bible, the natural world is likewise celebrated as a testament to God's creativity and majesty. Passages such as Psalm 19 declare that the heavens proclaim the glory of God, inviting believers to see the divine hand in the beauty of nature. While Artemis was seen as a custodian of the wilderness, the Bible presents God as the ultimate creator and sustainer of all life. This distinction highlights differing views on the relationship between humanity, nature, and the divine. Finally, Artemis's representation as a goddess who bridged the human and divine realms offers a thought-provoking contrast to biblical themes of mediation. In her role as an intermediary, Artemis was believed to provide access to divine blessings and protection. Her temple rituals and priestesses facilitated this connection, offering tangible expressions of devotion and spiritual aid. In contrast, the Bible teaches that Jesus Christ serves as the sole mediator between God and humanity. This theological difference underscores a fundamental shift introduced by Christianity, which emphasized direct access to God through faith rather than reliance on intermediaries or rituals. In examining the symbolism and representations of Artemis in the biblical context, it becomes clear that she embodies many themes that resonate with universal human experiences: protection, fertility, purity, and connection to the divine. While the theological underpinnings of her worship differ greatly from the monotheistic worldview of the Bible, the parallels reveal shared human concerns and aspirations. The contrast between the material and the spiritual, the polytheistic and the monotheistic, highlights the transformative message of the gospel as it spread into regions where Artemis held sway. Artemis's enduring legacy in the ancient world serves as a reminder of the cultural and religious diversity that shaped the early Christian experience. Her prominence in Ephesus and the confrontation with her cult, as recorded in Acts, illustrate the dynamic interplay between faiths and the profound changes brought about by the rise of Christianity. The symbolism of Artemis, though rooted in a different tradition, continues to offer insights into the challenges and opportunities faced by those navigating the intersection of faith, culture, and identity. The influence of Artemis on early Christianity, while indirect, was significant in shaping the dynamics of the faith's emergence and expansion in the ancient Mediterranean world. Artemis, as a prominent deity in Greco-Roman religion, represented a powerful cultural and religious force that the early Christian church had to contend with, particularly in cities like Ephesus, where her worship was deeply ingrained in the fabric of society. Examining the interactions between the cult of Artemis and the nascent Christian movement reveals how the early church navigated the challenges posed by established pagan traditions, economic systems, and societal norms, ultimately influencing its theological development, community organization, and evangelistic strategies. Artemis held an especially central role in Ephesus, a major hub of trade, culture, and religion in the Roman Empire. The Temple of Artemis, or Artemision, was a monumental structure regarded as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was not only a religious center, but also a social, political, and economic nucleus for the city. Pilgrims, merchants, and artisans flocked to Ephesus to participate in her cult, offering sacrifices, purchasing religious artifacts, and contributing to the city's prosperity. For centuries, the worship of Artemis had been a cornerstone of Ephesian identity, making her influence pervasive in the daily lives of its citizens. This cultural backdrop created a complex environment for the spread of Christianity, as new converts were often required to reject not only religious practices, but also deeply entrenched societal values tied to the goddess. The Book of Acts provides a vivid account of the tension between the worship of Artemis and the early Christian mission. In Acts chapter 19, Paul's ministry in Ephesus highlights the clash between the two belief systems. Paul's preaching that gods made by human hands are no gods at all directly challenged the legitimacy of Artemis and her temple. This message resonated with many Ephesians, leading some to abandon their pagan practices and embrace Christianity. However, it also provoked a fierce backlash from those whose livelihoods and social status were intertwined with the cult of Artemis. Demetrius, a silversmith who crafted small shrines of the goddess, organized a riot against Paul, accusing him of endangering their trade and dishonoring the great goddess Artemis, whose worship all of Asia and the world revered. The riot in the Ephesian theater demonstrates the strong emotional and economic ties to Artemis and highlights the resistance that early Christians faced when challenging established religious systems. The economic implications of Artemis's influence on Ephesus were profound. Her temple not only attracted pilgrims, but also generated a thriving market for religious artifacts, such as statues, amulets, and offerings. Artisans and merchants depended on the cult of Artemis for their livelihoods, making her worship an integral part of the local economy. The success of Christianity in converting individuals posed a direct threat to this economic structure, as new believers no longer participated in the purchase or veneration of idols. This economic disruption fueled hostility toward the Christian community and underscored the broader societal implications of religious transformation. For the early church, navigating these economic tensions required strategic approaches to evangelism and community building, emphasizing spiritual riches over material wealth. Theologically, the confrontation with the cult of Artemis helped shape early Christian teachings on idolatry, worship, and the nature of God. The Bible consistently condemns idolatry, portraying it as a rejection of the one true God and a source of spiritual blindness. The worship of Artemis, with its reliance on elaborate rituals, grand temples, and physical representations of the goddess, exemplified the idolatry that Christian teachings sought to dismantle. This theological emphasis on the superiority of worshiping an unseen God who created the heavens and the earth provided a stark contrast to the visible and tangible practices associated with Artemis. The early church's rejection of idols and its insistence on spiritual worship became defining characteristics of Christian identity, distinguishing it from the surrounding pagan cultures. Artemis's role as a protector of women also intersected with early Christian efforts to redefine the spiritual and social roles of women within the faith. In the cult of Artemis, Women played prominent roles as priestesses and participants in rituals, often finding empowerment and autonomy through their devotion to the goddess. Artemis was particularly revered as a guardian of women during childbirth, offering protection and blessings in times of vulnerability. In contrast, Christianity introduced a different vision of womanhood, rooted in the teachings of Christ and the apostles. The New Testament emphasizes the spiritual equality of men and women, highlighting their shared inheritance of salvation. Women such as Lydia, Priscilla, and Phoebe are portrayed as vital contributors to the growth of the church, engaging in leadership, teaching, and service. The coexistence of these differing roles created a space for dialogue and tension as women navigated the transition from the pagan cults of Artemis to the Christian community. Artemis's influence on early Christianity can also be seen in the challenges posed by syncretism, the blending of religious practices and beliefs. As Christianity spread in regions where Artemis was worshipped, some converts struggled to fully abandon their pagan traditions. The temptation to incorporate elements of Artemis's cult into Christian worship posed a significant challenge for the early church, which sought to maintain the purity and distinctiveness of its faith. Letters such as Paul's epistles to the Ephesians and Corinthians address issues of doctrinal integrity, warning against the adoption of pagan practices and urging believers to fully commit to the teachings of Christ. These admonitions highlight the importance of theological clarity and the need to resist cultural pressures that could dilute the Christian message. The influence of Artemis on early Christianity extended beyond theological and cultural challenges to include practical implications for community organization and worship. The grandeur of Artemis's temple and the communal nature of her cult provided a model of religious practice that early Christians sought to reimagine. While Artemis's worship emphasized public rituals, opulent spaces, and visible expressions of devotion, the early church focused on intimate gatherings, shared meals, and spiritual worship. The emphasis on house churches and personal relationships reflected a deliberate shift from the grandiosity of pagan temples to the simplicity and authenticity of Christian fellowship. This contrast reinforced the distinct identity of the Christian community and helped it grow in the face of opposition. Despite the opposition from the cult of Artemis, Christianity eventually gained prominence in Ephesus and the surrounding regions. The decline of Artemis's influence and the eventual destruction of her temple symbolized the transformative power of the Christian message. Over time, the theological and cultural foundations of Christianity replaced the polytheistic traditions that had defined the ancient Mediterranean world. This transition was not merely a change in religious practices, but a profound shift in worldview, values, and identity. The legacy of Artemis's influence on early Christianity is a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the faith. The confrontation with her cult forced the early church to clarify its teachings, develop strategies for community building, and navigate the complex interplay of culture, economics, and religion. The story of Artemis and her impact on Christianity offers a rich illustration of how faith can transform societies while engaging with the cultural forces of its time. In conclusion, the influence of Artemis on early Christianity highlights the dynamic relationship between faith and culture in the ancient world. Her prominence in Ephesus, both as a religious figure and a cultural symbol, created significant challenges for the early church. However, these challenges also provided opportunities for growth, innovation, and the development of a distinct Christian identity. The interplay between the worship of Artemis and the spread of Christianity serves as a reminder of the enduring power of faith to inspire change and shape the course of history. Artemis, the revered goddess of nature, fertility, and protection in the Greco-Roman world, offers an intriguing lens through which to examine concepts of femininity in the Bible. While Artemis is not directly mentioned in biblical texts, her widespread influence in the ancient Mediterranean world shaped the cultural and religious contexts in which early Christianity emerged. Artemis embodied ideals of femininity that were both empowering and rooted in the cultural norms of her time. Comparing her attributes and the roles she played with the representations of women in the Bible reveals nuanced perspectives on femininity, spirituality, and societal expectations. Artemis was often depicted as a protector of women, particularly in moments of vulnerability such as childbirth. Her association with life-giving and nurturing qualities made her a central figure for women seeking protection and blessings during such critical times. Her role as a guardian of women was celebrated in her temples, especially in Ephesus, where her worship was a cornerstone of community identity. Women frequently served as priestesses in her cult, holding positions of power and influence that were rare in many other societal spheres of the time. This aspect of Artemis's worship highlights a form of femininity rooted in autonomy, strength, and the capacity to nurture and protect. In contrast, biblical depictions of femininity often emphasize spiritual and relational roles within the context of a covenantal relationship with God. In the Bible, women are portrayed in diverse and sometimes complex ways, embodying a range of characteristics from courage and leadership to humility and service. Figures such as Deborah, Ruth, and Esther demonstrate that biblical femininity is not monolithic, but rather multifaceted. Deborah, a prophetess and judge, led Israel with wisdom and strength, embodying leadership qualities often attributed to Artemis in her role as a guide and protector. Ruth's loyalty and determination reflect a relational dimension of femininity that prioritizes faithfulness and love. Esther's bravery and strategic thinking highlight a form of empowerment rooted in faith and divine providence. While Artemis's femininity is tied to her status as a virgin goddess, symbolizing independence and self-sufficiency, biblical femininity often finds expression within relationships, whether familial, communal, or spiritual. The concept of virginity in the Bible, particularly in the New Testament, carries a spiritual connotation rather than an autonomous one. Virginity is celebrated as a commitment to purity and devotion to God, as seen in the life of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary's role exemplifies a form of femininity characterized by humility, obedience, and an openness to divine will. This differs from Artemis's portrayal, where virginity symbolizes freedom from the constraints of traditional roles and societal expectations. Artemis's association with nature and fertility also provides a contrast to biblical views on femininity and creation. Artemis was often seen as a goddess who controlled natural cycles and ensured the fertility of the earth and its inhabitants. Her connection to the wilderness and her depiction as a huntress further emphasized her dominion over the natural world. In the Bible, women are not portrayed as controllers of nature, but as vital participants in God's creation. The imagery of women giving birth and nurturing life is used to symbolize God's creative power and covenantal promises. For example, Sarah, Hannah, and Elizabeth, all women who experienced miraculous births, are depicted as instruments of God's divine plan, emphasizing the role of faith and divine intervention, rather than personal control over fertility. One of the most striking contrasts between Artemis and biblical femininity is the source of empowerment. Artemis's power is intrinsic, tied to her divine nature and her role as a protector and provider. She embodies a form of femininity that celebrates independence and self-reliance. In the Bible, however, empowerment often comes through a relationship with God and reliance on His guidance and strength. Women like Mary Magdalene, Lydia, and Phoebe find their roles and identities transformed by their faith and commitment to God's mission. This relational aspect of empowerment highlights the importance of community and interdependence within the biblical framework. The tension between the worship of Artemis and the rise of Christianity also reveals how these differing views on femininity played out in societal contexts. In cities like Ephesus, where Artemis was venerated, women's roles in her cult offered a level of visibility and influence that contrasted with their positions in broader society. Christianity, while challenging the worship of Artemis, also brought a new perspective on the value and dignity of women. Paul's letters, particularly those to the Ephesians and Corinthians, reflect an effort to redefine women's roles within the Christian community. While some passages have been interpreted as limiting, others emphasize the spiritual equality of men and women, such as in Galatians, where Paul states that in Christ there is neither male nor female, but all are one. The emphasis on community and mutual support within Christianity provided an alternative vision of femininity that contrasted with the autonomy often associated with Artemis. Early Christian women played significant roles in the spread of the gospel, hosting house churches, supporting missionary efforts, and serving as deacons and leaders. These roles, while rooted in service, also highlighted the transformative power of faith to elevate the status of women in a society where their contributions were often marginalized. Artemis's image as a huntress and her association with protection and strength also invite comparisons with biblical narratives that portray women in roles of courage and action. Jael, for instance, in the book of Judges, demonstrates remarkable bravery in defeating Sisera, an enemy of Israel. Her actions, like those of Judith in later apocryphal texts, align with the qualities of decisiveness and strength often attributed to Artemis. However, in the biblical framework, these actions are not rooted in personal power, but are seen as instruments of God's will, underscoring the dependence on divine guidance, rather than individual capability. The parallels and contrasts between Artemis and biblical femininity ultimately reflect broader cultural and theological differences between pagan and Judeo-Christian worldviews. Artemis represents a vision of femininity that is self-sufficient, deeply connected to nature, and rooted in the physical and material aspects of life. In contrast, biblical femininity is often portrayed as relational, emphasizing spiritual dependence on God and the integration of faith into all aspects of life. Both perspectives address the complexities of womanhood, offering insights into the diverse ways femininity has been understood and celebrated across cultures and traditions. In the context of early Christianity, the influence of Artemis and her cult cannot be overlooked. Her prominence in cities like Ephesus created a cultural backdrop against which Christian teachings on femininity, purity, and empowerment were articulated. The contrast between Artemis's representation and biblical ideals of womanhood provided early Christians with opportunities to define their faith and identity in opposition to prevailing pagan norms. This tension not only shaped the experiences of women in the early church, but also contributed to the broader transformation of cultural and religious values in the ancient world. The enduring legacy of Artemis and her symbolism offers a window into the ways femininity has been constructed and interpreted in different spiritual traditions. By examining her influence and comparing it to biblical narratives, it becomes clear that the question of what it means to be a woman has been a dynamic and evolving conversation throughout history. Both Artemis and the Bible present unique perspectives, reflecting the values and aspirations of their respective communities, while offering timeless insights into the complexities of femininity, faith, and the divine. In considering the influence and representation of Artemis alongside the biblical view of femininity, it becomes clear that both perspectives address the complexities of womanhood from their unique cultural and theological frameworks. Artemis, as a prominent goddess in the Greco-Roman pantheon, embodied ideals of strength, independence, and guardianship that resonated deeply within her community. Her connection to nature, fertility, and protection offered women a divine model of autonomy and empowerment. In contrast, biblical portrayals of femininity often emphasize relational dynamics, spiritual devotion, and reliance on God's guidance, presenting a different but equally profound vision of what it means to be a woman. The interplay between these two paradigms highlights the diverse ways societies have sought to understand and celebrate the role of women. Artemis's worship, deeply embedded in the social and economic fabric of cities like Ephesus, provided women with an active role in religious life. Priestesses and female devotees found purpose and identity within a structure that honored their contributions. Meanwhile, the biblical narrative introduced a model of femininity that, while still shaped by cultural norms, offered a new spiritual equality. Women like Deborah, Ruth, Mary, and Lydia demonstrate how biblical teachings could elevate their status and influence, not through divine autonomy as seen in Artemis, but through faith, obedience, and participation in God's larger plan. These contrasting yet overlapping views of femininity reveal a shared human endeavor to define the role of women in society and in relation to the divine. The qualities attributed to Artemis, protection, purity, and fertility, echo themes present in biblical accounts, albeit from a different theological perspective. Both traditions acknowledge the strength and significance of women, though they frame their empowerment and purpose through distinct lenses. While Artemis's symbolism often centered on personal autonomy and control over natural cycles, the Bible emphasized relational dependence on God's provision and guidance. The enduring legacy of these two perspectives underscores the importance of cultural context in shaping spiritual and social values. The worship of Artemis reflected the values of a polytheistic society that sought divine favor through tangible rituals and symbols. The biblical worldview, rooted in monotheism, encouraged a more personal connection to the Creator, one that transformed societal norms and individual roles. Both approaches highlight the vital role women play in their respective spiritual narratives, illustrating how religious beliefs continue to influence the understanding of gender and identity. Ultimately, the comparison between Artemis and biblical femininity provides a deeper appreciation for the diversity of thought and experience surrounding women's roles in history. It demonstrates that femininity is not a static concept, but one that evolves in dialogue with cultural, theological, and social developments. By examining these ancient perspectives, we gain insight into how past societies grappled with questions of womanhood, and we are reminded of the ongoing importance of exploring these themes in our own time.